Okay, so lecture 2, unit 2. We just talked about how atoms come together to build minerals. Well, if we want to have an understanding of what types of atoms or elements make up minerals, we should probably look at the most common elements on Earth. So we actually learned this in the previous unit. We looked at the composition or what the material is made out of for the crust as well as the mantle. When we consider the crust, that uppermost layer of the Earth, there are several elements that we'll want to keep in our minds. The first two are the most common elements in Earth's crust, and they account for almost 75% of Earth's crust. These are oxygen and silicon. These two elements referenced by the symbols O and Si. These are the most common elements in the Earth's crust. 75% of all of Earth's crust are those two elements. Now, if we were to look at the remaining portion, those elements would be the elements aluminum, which would account for 8%. Iron, Fe, would account for 5%. Ca is calcium, 3.6%. Sodium, Na, is 2.8%. Potassium, the symbol K, 2.6%. And magnesium, Mg, at 2.1%. I think in total, this is around 98% of the Earth's crust. All of those other elements in the periodic table are accounted for in the remaining 2%. Now, when we begin to look at the minerals in the crust, we're going to want to pay attention to these elements. These are the most common elements that we will find in our minerals. Now, remember, we aren't just dealing with the crust. In certain examples, in certain scenarios, in certain places, we have to pay attention to the mantle. The mantle is that second layer of where the material that is inside of the earth and what it is made out of. And it has a slightly different composition. Well, actually very different composition. It has oxygen, again, as its most common element at about 45%. Silicon as well, 22% this time. But now in second place, above silicon is magnesium. Magnesium is 23%. And combining all of these together is about 90%. All these three elements together, oxygen, silicon, and magnesium, accounts for 90% of the mantle. There are other elements like iron, aluminum, sodium, potassium, and calcium, but these are all at much smaller percentages than what we observed them to be in the crust. So just a couple of reminders about the mantle. We're still solid. It's still under high pressure. It's not liquid. And in fact, these three elements come together to form the mineral olivine. And I showed a picture last time in the previous unit, but I wanted to show you a much clearer, much more beautiful olivine mineral right here. Okay, so common elements in the crust, common elements in the mantle. Now, let's remember plate tectonics. Here, when we talk about plate tectonics, we really want to remember the lithosphere. The lithosphere is that solid, rigid, and elastic part of the outermost part of the Earth's layers. So the lithosphere can actually take two shapes. Remember, we had two types of crust. We have the oceanic lithosphere and the continental lithosphere. The continental lithosphere is going to be made of those elements that are most common in the crust. However, when we look at the oceanic crust, the oceanic lithosphere, that material is coming up directly from the asthenosphere. It's coming up from material that is very, very similar in composition to the mantle. These places, these divergent plate boundaries that we looked at previously, these seafloor spreading centers, they are fed by magma that is coming up from the mantle. And so the crust for the oceans is going to look different because it was formed by magma from the mantle. It is going to look different from that magma and that crust that goes into forming the continents. The continental crust is going to look much similar to the overall crust in general, but the magma that contributes to the crust for the oceans is going to look very similar to the composition of the mantle. I wanted to draw this distinction. Remember, we talked about the stuffed crust pizza. Though those two different crusts, the thin crust for the pizza and the stuffed crust on the end, they're made out of different things. Two different crusts made out of two different things. And we have to remember where those crusts come from.